Bonjour à tous, welcome to the first episode of the French Blabla podcast, Speak Like a Native. Je m'appelle Caroline, and today we're going to talk about a problem that I'm sure you have experienced at some point in your learning process. After talking to my students, I noticed that some of them were actually afraid of using French. They felt anxious and as a result blocked and paralyzed. The big problem is the language is meant to be spoken, so how can you get better if you don't use it? So my students faced a real obstacle in their learning journey. To be honest, it actually happened to me too, to be anxious and not being able to speak, which seems a bit weird as I'm a language teacher and I'm podcasting in English. But I learned Japanese a while ago, and after some years of not using it, I wanted to brush it up a little bit. I found a language exchange partner, and when came my turn to talk, I was completely unable to utter anything. I just wanted this moment to stop and go back to my grammar. I was like, no, it's okay, we can talk next time. Of course, this next time never happened. In the first part of this podcast, we're going to focus on the roots of anxiety and paralysis. And in the second part, we will talk more about tips and ways to ease this feeling and how to overcome our fears. When I was trying to get rid of my fear of speaking Japanese, I looked around to find solutions people use to tackle this anxiety. My first reaction was, what? Most of them were suggesting me to just go out and face my fear and don't forget not to be ashamed. How achievable is that? Seriously. Is it even possible to be more vague than that? I really needed to come up with better, more practical task-based solution that would actually help my students and myself. There are many reasons to fear, and I wondered why I felt it when I had to speak Japanese, but not when I had to speak English. What was different this time? Some of the reasons that are usually stated are having a lack of self-confidence, being not ready to speak, being unable to say something, and being shy. I think in my case, I was not ready to speak. I had a very long break from Japanese, and I saw myself as completely unable to say something, even though it wasn't the case, and it triggered a lot of anxiety. That's the moment when we need to stop our negative thoughts and go back to reality. Because these fears are irrational. We imagine that things are going to go wrong and that we won't be able to cope. The way we think about a situation has a major effect on how we feel. We need to cast a realistic light on the situation we're afraid of. First, we have to identify our anxiety. What triggered it? For example, I can't speak, I forgot all my French. Then, we need to think about facts that are going to support our thought. For example, okay, I haven't used French for 2 years. And then we think about facts that provide evidence against our thought. For example, my level is B1, I can talk about the movie I've seen yesterday. Finally, we try to come up with an alternative and more realistic perspective. For example, yes, okay, it's true, I haven't used French for 2 years, I'm a bit rusty, but I can do a little bit of small talk. Try to do that now. Think about the last time you were blocked and try to come up with an alternative perspective. How do you feel after this? Another strategy that you can try is to grade the situations that are causing you distress. Let me explain. If you think about speaking French, your level of anxiety is going to skyrocket. Because it's too vague, the worst can actually happen. What are you going to talk about? If you think about a more precise situation, for example, introducing yourself in French, how is your level going to be? Not as high, I'm sure. You need to try to face your fear by entering the least anxiety-provoking situation first. Make a mental list of communicative situations that you know you can face or that you could. It could be, for example, talking about a book you read, ordering at a restaurant, or talking about your weekend. Then, little by little, add the situations that you fear, but still in a graded manner. You don't need to jump off the cliff to face your fear. You can do it with baby steps. If you choose a communicative situation, then you know the vocabulary you will use. You will know the questions you'll be asked, or that you're going to ask. Simply, you'll know what is expected of you. Having a language roadmap will decrease your fear and anxiety because you know what will happen. Another aspect of this roadmap that is often overlooked is the importance of the environment. We are used to study and to talk in a certain place. For example, at school. You have your habits. For example, the teacher asks you a question, you answer, and that's it. You are in a safe place. You have your notebook with you. You know how things go. But having to talk in a different place that we're not used to can actually cause distress. You lose all your points of reference. There's nothing you can grab to help you out. Before going out to a language exchange meeting, maybe you can try a different approach. Find a place where you feel comfortable and try to create your own points of reference. And you can then meet somebody there for a language exchange, a lesson, or just a French friend. Now I have a question for you. Did you know that 50% of communication is actually listening? However, I've noticed that the fear of not understanding is one of the causes of language paralysis. The simple thought of a possibility of not understanding is enough to make somebody cringe. You don't know what to say and you feel so embarrassed. I'm sure you're going to recognize one of the following patterns that happen when you are in this kind of situation. The usual responses that I've noticed in my students and also in me is the body language expressing fear towards the speaker, a completely confused look, and then you're going to mutter something like, I don't understand, or just some sound like, It's the perfect way to block the conversation. And the problem is we don't really learn how to deal with this situation, how to actively listen and react, even though it is paramount to increase our confidence, our fluency, and simply to speak like a native. I'm not going to go over here in the podcast all the expressions that we can use to unblock a conversation, but be sure to download the PDF and watch the video on today's episode page to get your hands on the secret expressions they don't teach you. Speaking of expressions, this leads me to the next point I want to talk about. I don't know if you've noticed, but we always use the same expressions when we talk in our mother tongue. For example, I use du coup all the time, even when it's not needed. I sometimes use it like a comma. When we speak in a foreign language, we have to think first in our mother tongue and then we translate. Later, when we are fluent, we don't need this step anymore. But for the time being, we need it. Do you see where I'm getting here? If you're used to say certain things, not being able to say them anymore can also trigger anxiety and paralysis. What you could do to avoid this is to have a careful look at the words and expressions you use daily in your mother tongue and learn how to say them in French or in any other language you're studying. Another advice that I've encountered quite often is to join a language exchange. However, it can be a bit daunting to talk to a complete stranger. I mentioned earlier to take a baby step approach. On top of that, I would suggest to find somebody whose level isn't completely too different than yours. If you find yourself with somebody who's super good, you may be intimidated to talk because you're going to compare yourself and think that you're wasting his or her time with your limited level. Whereas if you find somebody whose level is pretty much the same or lower, you know that the person is facing the same struggles. But remember that nobody will judge you. Mistakes are a proof that you're getting better and improving. You should welcome them and be proud that you're going forward in your learning process. So, what are the situations when you feel anxious and blocked? What do you do to overcome your fear? I would love to hear about it. Leave a comment on today's episode's page on French Blabla website. If today's show was helpful to you, I would love you to return the favor by leaving a review on iTunes. I'm Caroline, and thanks for spending some time with me today. À très vite!